It's amazing how a song can just stick with you, you know? Like the other day, Dido's Life for Rent was playing in my head, and especially that line, "Nothing in my life is truly mine," really got me thinking. I mean, in the song, it seems like she's talking about not being fully committed to anything, just drifting.
Yeah, I think a lot of us can relate to that feeling, right? Like we're just passing through life, never really settling down.
Exactly. But, and here's where things got interesting for me, that same line, "Nothing in my life is truly mine." It kind of reminded me of this idea in spirituality, like poverty of spirit, especially how it connects to Marian consecration.
Oh, that's a really cool connection. It does seem like a bit of a jump, though, right? From a
It,
pop song about not belonging to this whole spiritual practice.
it does. And that's what we're going to be taking a deep dive into today. For you listening, we're going to explore this connection and see how nothing is truly yours when it's part of surrendering to God and Mary, how that's not about being lost, but about finding true freedom and purpose. The opposite of just renting your life.
And it's worth mentioning that Marian consecration is a big part of Catholic spirituality. But the ideas behind it, like belonging, commitment, what it means to truly own something, these are things everyone thinks about, no matter what your background is.
Let's start with Life for Rent itself. Like I said, it feels like it's about not being connected to anything, just feeling temporary, like the singer is watching life go by instead of living it, never really committing. That whole for rent thing really captures that, don't you think?
Yeah, it totally does. It's like she's always on the outside looking in, never really putting down roots, like a visitor passing through. The lyrics really paint that picture well.
And that line, "Nothing I have is truly mine," it feels like the heart of the song, right? Like, it's
Yes.
not just
Yeah.
about material stuff, it's deeper than that. It's like she doesn't even own her own life, no
Yeah.
direction, no real sense of belonging. But, and I'm curious if you hear this too. Do you sense there's also this longing underneath it all? Like maybe she wants something more permanent, a real place to belong.
Absolutely. There's definitely that yearning there. It speaks to that basic human need to connect with something bigger than ourselves, something lasting. And it reminds me of that quote from St. Augustine's Confessions. He said, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." It's that search for something beyond the temporary that I think everyone feels.
Such a powerful quote. So, that restlessness, Dido sings about St. Louis de Montfort and his total consecration to Jesus through Mary almost seems like a direct response to that, like the opposite of Life for Rent.
Yeah, definitely. Marian consecration is all about choosing to surrender completely and forever. Instead of feeling like things are only temporarily ours, it's saying, okay, I'm giving myself totally to God through Mary, no holding back.
And here's the thing, and this might be surprising to some listeners in the song, not fully giving herself is what seems to be causing the singer pain. But in Marian consecration, it's the giving, the total surrender to Mary, that brings this feeling of security and belonging to Christ. It's like the opposite of how the world usually works.
It is kind of counterintuitive when you think about it, right? The world tells us to hold on tight, to possess and control as much as we can. But Marian consecration flips that script completely. It's about acknowledging that everything we have, our time, talents, our very life, it all comes from God. And by entrusting those things to Mary, we're basically saying, you're the best one to take care of all this. Use it for God's glory.
So the completely different way of looking at ownership, not clinging to the illusion of control, but acknowledging that everything ultimately belongs to God. And giving it to Mary is like the best way to honor that truth.
Exactly. It's recognizing that we're God's creatures and responding to his love by giving ourselves back to him and doing that through Mary, who perfectly embodied that surrender.
And that idea of surrender, of realizing we don't really own anything, that brings us to this whole concept of poverty of spirit, right? And I think for a lot of people, when they hear poverty, they think about not having enough money. But it's so much more than that, isn't it?
It really is. Poverty of spirit is about what's happening inside of us. It's about letting go, not just of possessions, although that can be part of it, but of our pride, our selfish desires. It's admitting that we need God for everything. You can be rich and still have poverty of spirit, and you can be struggling financially, but still be clinging to your ego. It's all about where your heart is.
So it's like creating an empty space inside ourselves so that God can fill it.
Exactly. We need to make room for God. That's why it's such a big deal in the Beatitudes. Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." It's like the foundation of a truly spiritual life. Because when we're humble enough to admit we need God, that's when he can really start working in us.
That makes a lot of sense. It reminds me of something I heard, I think it was St. Augustine, about how God can only fill empty hands. If we're holding on to our own desires and trying to do everything ourselves, there's no space for God to give us anything.
It's a great image. We need to let go of our need to control everything if we want to receive what God wants to give us.
Now, anyone familiar with the Carmelite tradition knows they emphasize poverty of spirit a lot. Like it's a key part of becoming closer to God. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, Carmelite saints like St. John of the Cross, St. Teresa of Avila, and St. Therese of Lisieux, they all had a lot to say about why poverty of spirit is so important and what it can lead to.
Let's start with St. John of the Cross. He talked about the dark night, which sounds kind of scary to some people.
Yeah.
How does poverty of spirit fit into that?
So for St. John, the dark night is this process of being purified, of letting go of things that are holding us back from God. And he believed that to really be united with God, we need to get rid of all our attachments, even the ones that seem good or spiritual. He actually said, to reach satisfaction in all, desire satisfaction in nothing. To come to possess all, desire the possession of nothing. To arrive at being all, desire to be nothing. Basically, even good things can become chains, and true freedom is found in depending only on God.
Wow, that's pretty intense. So he's saying that we need to detach from everything, even good feelings we might have during prayer.
Exactly. He saw that even those things could distract us from truly being with God. And going through that process, the dark night, can be tough because you're letting go of things you've come to rely on. But he said the rewards are huge freedom from anxiety because God is all you need, complete union with God and being able to love purely without any selfishness.
That's a pretty amazing transformation. What about St. Teresa of Avila? How did she see poverty of spirit, especially in the interior castle?
Well, St. Teresa also believed that detaching from things was crucial for prayer and spiritual growth. For her, it wasn't just about material wealth, but also our own desires, our plans, even wanting specific experiences in prayer. She said that if we're too focused on what we want, we can't truly follow God's will. So if you're always thinking about what you're going to get out of something, you might be blocking God from working in your life.
That's a good point. So being selfish can keep us from experiencing God's will.
Exactly. For St. Teresa, the spiritual life was about going deeper into ourselves, like entering a castle, and letting go of things is the key to unlocking the doors to where God is. And the result of that is peace, understanding in prayer, and a closer relationship with God.
And then there's St. Thérèse of Lisieux, the little flower with her little way. How does that fit into all of this?
St. Therese was like the embodiment of poverty of spirit. For her, being spiritually childlike meant realizing she was nothing without God and putting all her trust in his love and mercy. She didn't try to own anything, claim anything, or demand anything. She just surrendered. And she wrote this beautiful prayer. I wish to be poor in spirit, O my God, and so to receive your kingdom. I know that in heaven you will do great things for me because I expect them of your goodness. But I will remain always little and weak, counting on your power to sustain me. And what she found was peace, complete trust in God, and a love for him that was pure and innocent like a child's.
So across these three Carmelite saints, we see this theme that poverty of spirit is really important for getting closer to God, even though they all lived it out in different ways.
Exactly. Whether it's detaching from things like St. John of the Cross talked about, surrendering your own will like St. Teresa, or being completely dependent on God like St. Therese, it's all about making room for God to work in our lives.
And that brings us back to Marian Consecration. For anyone thinking about this path, how did St. Louis de Montfort connect giving everything to Mary with this idea of poverty of spirit?
St. Louis de Montfort thought that giving ourselves totally to Mary was the best way to become truly poor in spirit. In true devotion to Mary, he wrote, since everything we have is God's, it is best to entrust it to Mary, who will guard it as a mother and offer it to God in the purest way possible. So by giving Mary everything, our accomplishments, our prayers, even our free will, we're admitting that those things aren't really ours to begin with. We're putting them in the best hands possible so they can be used for God's glory.
So it's not just a nice thing to do, it's actually a way to put poverty of spirit into action.
Exactly. It takes this idea that can seem kind of vague and makes it real in your life. It's surrendering in a very concrete way, and it helps you see how much you need God.
This has been so insightful. For anyone listening who relates to that feeling of drifting, that life for rent thing we talked about, what are some things they can do to start living out this poverty of spirit?
Well, one important thing, especially if you've done Marian Consecration, is to pray the daily renewal of your consecration. It's a simple reminder that you belong to Jesus through Mary. You can also practice letting go of the need to control everything. When something bad happens, try to trust God's plan. See everything, even challenges, as chances to depend on Him more. Be grateful for everything you have, knowing it's a gift from God. Give your time and energy to others generously, and try to detach from your emotions. Seek God beyond just how you're feeling when you pray. Basically, live with that childlike trust that St. Therese had.
Those are great practical tips. It's about shifting our focus away from ourselves and towards God in our everyday lives.
Yes, exactly. It's a process of retraining your heart to see God as the source of everything good and everything you need.
So to bring it all back around, while that song Life for Rent is about feeling lost and not belonging, poverty of spirit, the kind we can find through Marian consecration, gives us a completely different answer. It's not about lacking something. It's about receiving everything by giving everything to God.
Exactly. It might seem backwards, but by emptying ourselves, by admitting that we don't own anything, we open ourselves up to God's love and grace. And the amazing thing is, that's how we find true belonging, not to temporary things, but to God Himself.
So for everyone listening, I want to leave you with this question. Does holding on tightly to your possessions and your sense of control actually bring you the happiness and security you're looking for? Or could real freedom come from surrendering everything to God through Mary? It's a big question, but it's worth thinking about. And I encourage you to explore Marian consecration and the writings of those Carmelite saints.
It's a path that might seem strange to the world, but it leads to true belonging, a connection with the very heart of God.